It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host this morning. Going to cover a lot of ground today, so stick with us. It's going to be a busy week. As you're aware, we've got a whole lot of angst going on over in the Capitol. We're going to cover 4 particular stories this morning and interject some news issues as we move forward. You know, the over the weekend we had the truckers and the vets storming essentially the World War II memorial, carrying away the barricades, and Communist News Network, the mouthpiece of the administration, comes out and mocks the Million Vet March as Tea Party Crazies, showing you just exactly how out of touch that particular organization is with America. And that is going to be the theme of our show today, because what I want you to come away with at the end of today's multiple shows or episodes is that everyone who is talking to you and everyone who is talking at you from a position of the elitists, the governments out there, the central banks, the banking world, they're all trying desperately to convince you that what you know to be true is not. And the reason I say that is because we have multiple instances of every educational or news organization out there trying to push through some kind of a compromise between the House. We've got the World Bank telling us that we've got to do this. We've got China telling us to de-Americanize, telling the world, frankly. We have Lindsey Graham telling us that the best thing we could do is let Obamacare move forward and let Obama have free reign. And yet, the world knows, Americans, everyday people know that something is desperately wrong with the country. 80% of America says that we're headed in the wrong direction. And yet, everyone in the media, everyone on the government payroll, everyone who benefits from it is telling you otherwise. China tells us to de-Americanize, tells the world to de-Americanize over default fears. Well, let me tell you something. Today we're going to get into a little bit about the debt and how this is a false mantra that is being forced upon America. Failing to raise the debt is not default. It is not default. Default is when you refuse to pay the interest on your loans. We have more than ample income to pay the interest on our loans. So I want to change because they're redefining the word default. They're redefining it and tying it, and they're taking the term debt ceiling and default, and they're tying the two together, which is a false narrative. It's a fake collusion of the terms. They are not connected. And we're going to talk about that this morning, because I think it's important that America understand that when we're talking about default, you're talking about failure to pay the interest and the principal on your debt. And that is not the case at all, ladies and gentlemen. This is a narrative that is being fostered upon you by the media and the propaganda arm of not only the United States of America, but the world. Then we're going to talk about IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and Christine Lagarde. She is the chief of the International Monetary Fund, and she tells us that the U.S. dance with the debt limit is very, very concerning. Well, What I find even more concerning, Miss Lagarde, is the fact that what you're interested in is the IMF being in charge of every nation's economy, irrespective of sovereignty, irrespective of anything that would even smell remotely of independence and self-determination globally. She's a New World Order elitist, and we're going to expose her for exactly who and what she is. And then our fourth segment is going to take on Lindsey Graham. You know, the South Carolinian has gotten to be, I mean, look, in any other time, any other place, this guy would have been recalled by his own state, or he would have been called home by his own assembly, his own state legislator, and he would have been drawn and quartered, politically, if not literally. This guy is so far out of control. The best thing for the Republican Party, he says, is to let Obamacare proceed. Well, I got to tell you, I'm tired of hearing from the liberal left and the progressives that they know what's best for the Republican Party. You see, every time you hear a Democrat or a liberal or a progressive tell you, well, what's really important for the Republican Party, recognize what it is. They're trying to keep a duopoly two-party system alive because they know that if the Republican Party collapses or is overtaken by a Tea Party or a Patriot-type organization, that the jig is up. The jig is up in politics across the board. Because if they cannot control the Republican Party, let me tell you something. This whole thing is kabuki theater. It is no different than watching a play on a stage. These people pretend that they have your best interest at heart, while they are simultaneously negotiating your own demise. So let's get into our first story. You know, Communist News Network, CNN, mocked the Million Vet March. Why do I keep saying that? Million Met March. The Million Vet March as Tea Party Crazies. They covered this Million Vet March, which occurred in Washington. And basically what happened is tons of veterans and truckers and Americans in general went down there to D.C., and they walked over to where they had the World War II vet memorial closed, and they picked up the barricades, and they carried them over and dropped them off in front of the White House. Now, frankly, I would assume, and I would prefer, frankly, that those barricades were to lock Obama in versus veterans out. And there was and I posted this up on our Facebook page, which you can find by going to facebook.com/America's Voice Now. I posted up a picture there, and I put the comment on it that this should be posted on the mirror of every national government employee as a self-check in the morning. And here's what this sign said. They took a lot of the signs down that were on there that said that, you know, the mall is shut for the national government shutdown and all that crap. And it says, and this is what this reposted banner says. I was just following orders. Not a defense at Nuremberg. You have a legal obligation to evaluate the morality and legality of all orders you receive. You will be held responsible someday before God, humanity, and hopefully courts of law for all orders that you carried out. You see, that is indicative of the oath that every American who works for government or in the military or in law enforcement or in any other vestige has taken. They have taken an order that says, I will defend this nation, and I will defend this Constitution, and I will execute the laws of the nation faithfully, and I will protect her from all enemies, foreign, and, key operative word, domestic. Why? Because our founders knew. They knew that we faced a greater threat from inside than we did from external threats. They knew that all great cities fall when they're under siege, not because they're worn out or they're over or they are beaten by the enemy outside. they're usually lost because someone from the inside opens the gates. They knew that betrayal of principle, betrayal of faith, betrayal of your oath was where the real threat lied. They understood that 9 times out of 10, the way that a nation falls is not by, some barbarians at the gates storming it. Those barbarians are almost invariably allowed in by the sneaky traitor who goes and unlocks the gate in the dead of night. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly whom we are fighting against. The Lindsey Grahams, the John McCains, the John Boehners. These are the people who are, Cantor is another one. And frankly, I'm beginning to have concerns about Paul Ryan. These are the people who are desperately willing to unlock the gates and betray their own countrymen. What we have at this point in our history is a concerted effort to destroy America from the inside. And then you have organizations, alleged news organizations, that are, for all intents and purposes, supporting that effort by attempting to propagandize Americans into believing that there's something wrong with people who actually want the Constitution to be upheld. You see, CNN came out and said the rally, billed as the Million Vet March on the memorials, drew far fewer than 1 million people and evolved into a protest that resembled familiar Tea Party events from 2009 with yellow "Don't Tread on Me" flags. That's called the Gadsden flag, by the way, for those in the media who aren't familiar with it, throughout the crowd, and strong anti-Obama language from the podium and the audience. One speaker went as far as saying that the president was a Muslim and separately urged the crowd of hundreds to initiate a peaceful uprising. Hey, let me tell you something. That's one speaker went as far as that? Let me tell you something. This speaker every day says we need to have a massive peaceful uprising. Massive, civil, disobedient, peaceful uprising of Americans. You see, we need to have a revolution in this country, a peaceful one that says we will not tolerate what's going on in our nation any longer. We need to have a vast swath of America that is willing to stand up and say, I'm willing to deal with the short-term danger, the short-term discomfort, the short-term expense, the short-term damage that will occur to our economy, to your personal economy, to your personal safety, your personal comfort, in an effort to resolve these problems. We as a nation, as a people, have to stop vacillating and hand-wringing and saying, who's going to step forth? We are that who. And we have to be prepared for trouble, discomfort, for cold, for hunger. We have to be prepared for fear, because they will do everything to make you feel as if you are, one, marginalized, and two, outside the scope of mainstream America. But I got to tell you something, America. The truth of the matter is, the Republicans have a 28% approval rating, not because of people like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. They have a 28% approval rating because Americans no longer believe that they represent them. In fact, guys like Cruz and Lee are the reason that the Republican Party is not at an all-time low of like 8%, like the rest of Congress. Why is it that Congress has an 8% approval rating, and yet the Republican Party has a 28% approval rating? I hazard the guess that the real reason that the Republican Party has a 28% approval rating is because guys like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee are actually holding it up. It's the other way around. What they want you to believe is that those guys are dragging you down, when what I'm telling you is that they are the pillars that are holding the roof up. If 80% of America thinks the nation's headed in the wrong direction, folks, that tells you that we are not just talking about Republican voters. We're not just talking about independent voters. We're talking about Democrats as well. All three potential political ideologies, whether they be Democrat, Republican, or independent, excuse me, are deeply concerned about the course that America is taking. Now, we don't know whether they're deeply concerned because it's not gone left far enough or because it's not gone right far enough. But I can tell you this. Since we've gone this far left, you can deduce from the evidence, the empirical evidence, that what America is deeply concerned about is the fact that we've gone so far down the road of totalitarian and authoritarianism. End of argument. How do I know that? Well, because never in our history has America, 80% of America, thought that there was something wrong with the direction we were headed. Not that kind of a number. And since we are currently in the midst of a leftward shift, 80% are against the leftward shift. You see, this isn't time for us to be fearful. This isn't time for us to be nervous or unwilling to shoulder the burden. We now have to recognize it is time to move forward. America has allowed itself to fall into apathy, to fall into this level of, for all intents and purposes, we are already at a position where we are so dependent upon federal government largesse that most Americans can't drag themselves out of the chair. You're loaded up with antidepressants and Prozac, which are keeping the peace artificially. You're loaded up with EBT cards. And for the record, by the way, the EBT system went down over the weekend, for those of you that don't know it. And it caused massive panic throughout the nation. Walmarts were entirely cleared. And people basically went on rampages. Now, imagine a food stamp glitch that allows the nation to fall under the panic of and it wasn't really panic, it was a controlled looting. People are more interested in what's in it for me than they are in what's right for the country. But what I want you to recognize is that today, we as a nation, as a people, have to recognize that it is our obligation and our duty to preserve what this nation is going forward for our progeny. And I'm not saying our children and our grandchildren, for our progeny, because this will have generational effects for another 100 years. We have to be prepared for cold and hunger and fear. But I have to tell you, America, the number one thing you need to be prepared for is success. Success in achieving our goal. Success in retaining our sovereignty, our individual independence, our ability to define and determine our own destiny. Mark my words that what we are looking at here, what we're talking about here, is truly the difference between whether this nation will go forward as slaves or free men. We are not talking, we've reached the T at the end of the road. And what we're looking at here is not a question of do we go left politically or right politically. The choice is far more starker than that. The choice is actually life or death. And it's up to you to make that decision now. This is not a decision you can put off. This is not a decision you can vacillate on any longer. And it's not a decision that you can take lightly. Americans are famous for procrastination. Well, let me tell you something. Time's up. The homework is due. The paper is due. And it's crunch time. You can no longer ignore the consequences of where we are in reality. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of that reality. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle our second topic, which is foreign national reviews of the United States and how they're viewing us. China has called on us and the world to de-Americanize. Let me tell you something, folks. This is no friend of ours. And we need to make that abundantly clear. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us by going to our Facebook page. Please do so and like it, because that allows us to share all of our postings with you and all of your friends. You can find that page by going to facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And then you can find this and every other program and episode that we do right on YouTube on our channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us.